Hello again, AP World History students. Here we are for Key Concept 4.3 for Time Period 4 as we continue to review for the AP World History exam, looking at global interactions from 1450 to 1750. As a reminder, if you're just joining us here, in the description down below, I have linked key concept review packets that should help you through this information. If you need anything more in depth, AP Worldopedia and Freemanpedia are absolutely my favorite sites for preparing for the exam, albeit not affiliated with these videos. So let's go ahead and get started with our last key concept for this unit, and that is 4.3, State Consolidation and Imperial Expansion. What we see in this time period, in our early modern time period, is that the wealth generated from our global networks of exchange are going to lead to key changes among existing empires and kind of newly constituted empires in this time period. So let's take a look at how this happened. Rulers use a variety of methods to try to legitimize and consolidate their power. One thing that they did was they used religious ideas, art, and monumental architecture to try to legitimize their rule. And we see this in a number of ways. We see this in art, for example, the creation of Ottoman miniature paintings, which you see there on the far right, or in the middle, Qing imperial portraits. Art that is created to kind of glorify the state. In some cases, wealth is used to build monumental architecture to showcase power or the abilities of a ruling government. For example, in the top left you see there the Taj Mahal, the great mausoleum built in Mughal India. But the Mughals also constructed large mosques, which of course showcased their Islamic faith and granted them a great deal of legitimacy. And there in the bottom left, you also see that European palaces were built for the same purpose. Here, the Palace of Versailles is noteworthy. Of course, French kings not only showcasing their wealth and power, but using Versailles as a tool to consolidate that power, to keep an eye on the nobility, to make sure that they remove that nobility from perhaps any place where they could plot against the king, keep a closer eye on them. And so palaces like this were very important for that. We have other examples you can look at, for example, Russia and palaces of St. Petersburg as another example of European monarchs trying to consolidate power and keep an eye on others. But this was seen a great deal through this monumental architecture. Now, in addition to this, religious ideals were used to legitimize and consolidate power. And some examples of this we see are divine right in Europe. Here you see a king being crowned by kind of the hand of God. The use of Islam in the Safavid Empire, the use of Shia Islam as a way of consolidating power, the use of Islam in West African empires, Chinese emperors who would go through Confucian rituals, and even in some place like the Aztec Empire, the use of rituals to legitimize power, to consolidate power, as the Aztecs used conquest to build their empire. All of these were ways of legitimizing and consolidating authority. Now, states oftentimes treated different ethnic and religious groups in ways that tried to use their economic contribution, but also limit their ability to challenge the authority of the state. Some really good examples of this are seen in the Ottoman Empire. For example, the jizya tax on non-Muslims wanted to gain wealth from these people in exchange for toleration of their religion, but they also kind of limited their ability to participate in government. There's also the Devshirme system, the system of drafting non-Muslim children into military service, converting them, and then using them for that military service. There are other examples: Manchu policy toward the Han Chinese, and then we also see, as we talked about in our last video, the casta system in Spanish America as an example of this, a way of classifying people, giving some economic opportunity to help the economy of New Spain, but still kind of limiting who can really participate, especially to those Peninsulare class, somewhat to the Creole class, but certainly not to the lower castes. Now, rulers also used tribute collection and tax farming to generate revenue for territorial expansion. So we see this with the Ottoman Devshirme system. We see it with the Chinese examination system. Basically, bureaucracy and military professionals helping to. Excuse me, I lost my place here. Let's back up a little bit. The states were able to consolidate their authority by recruiting and using bureaucratic elites, as well as developing military professionals. This became much more common when rulers who wanted to maintain centralized control over population and resources. And our examples for this are the Ottoman Devshirme system, as I've talked about already, the Chinese examination system to find the best people for the job in bureaucracy, and even in Japan, the use of salaried samurai. Now, the last thing, which is not in your chart, is that rulers use tribute collection and tax farming as another way of generating revenue for territorial expansion. You probably are familiar with tribute collection when a region that is kind of subservient to the main central authority pays some type of tax in the form of monetary goods or maybe portions of their crops to the government in tribute. Sometimes that tribute might be given in labor or military service. But tax farming was also used. And what tax farming did was basically allow people, it was kind of a privatized way of collecting taxes. The government would give a license to a tax farmer who would pay the government for the right to go and collect taxes and would guarantee the government a certain share. And then they would go around and collect taxes on their own, trying to increase the efficiency of tax collection. Excuse me. Now, imperial expansion also relied on the increased use of gunpowder, cannons, and armed trade, which established large empires in both hemispheres in this time period. Europeans were especially known for establishing their trading post empires, which we talked about in Key Concept 4.1, especially in Africa and Asia. Two good examples of these are, of course, the Dutch and the Portuguese. These trading post empires proved profitable for rulers and merchants involved in these new global trade networks. But those empires also affected the power of the states in the interior of West and Central Africa, as these trading post empires really generated a great deal of money, often at the expense of those empires. Another thing that we see develop in this time period, of course, are land empires. Land empires expanded dramatically in size in this time period. One example of this is the Manchu Empire of China, which you see pictured there, also known as the Qing Empire. We see the Mughal Empire expand. You see where it existed under Akbar, and then later under Shah Jahan and Aurangzeb, as it expanded all the way until 1707. The Ottoman Empire, excuse me, also expanded dramatically in this time period. And you see it here at its peak in the 17th century. And lastly, the Russian Empire, which you see here in its expansion between 1500 and 1800, a little bit past this time period, but still a remarkable expansion as it becomes the largest empire in largest land-based empire in the world at this time. Now, European states were not so much land-based empires that we see there. Some of which we refer to those as gunpowder empires, the Mughal, Safavid, Ottoman empires. We oftentimes refer to them as gunpowder empires because of their use of modern gunpowder cannons and arms to establish these empires. But Europeans also used similar methods in establishing their new maritime empires. And prominent maritime empires, of course, were established by the Portuguese, the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, and the British. And the example I've given you here in this map is of the Portuguese Empire, but you can of course go look up on your own these others from Spain, the Netherlands, France, and Britain, as they established empires throughout the world. The British predominantly in North America, the French in North America, and of course the Spanish in North and South America, and in the Philippines. The last thing I want to look at is competition over trade routes. We see competition over trade routes, we see state rivalries, and we even see local resistance. And they are all going to provide challenges in this time period to state consolidation and expansion. After all, that is the theme of this key concept is how these states are either consolidating their power or expanding their reach. And certainly they did not do this without having to overcome something. And so the one thing that we see are competition over trade routes. For example, on the right here, we see a military battle between the Omani people and Europeans who had a trade rivalry in the Indian Ocean, oftentimes resulting in armed conflict. On the left here, we see an image of a pirate in the Caribbean, here a French pirate. And yes, I know it's a movie, but yes, pirates wreaked havoc on the periphery of these empires, kind of out of the reach of British, French, or Spanish navies. Oftentimes, sometimes even being granted, as the British did, being granted basically safe harbor in certain British regions if they agreed to attack Spanish or French ships. Now, some state rivalries also developed in this time period. In Europe, these state rivalries were also often the result of disagreements between Protestants and Catholics. So we see several wars, for example, the Schmalkaldic Wars, and most notably the 30 Years' War, that take place basically between Protestant Northern Europeans and Catholic Southern Europeans and the French, as they kind of battle for supremacy and who is right. This resulted in countless deaths and the slaughter of thousands of Europeans over quite some time, and ultimately results in Europeans just saying, you know what, be whatever religion you want to be, and a greater tolerance for religion in general, as especially German princes are allowed to decide whether or not they are Protestant or Catholic. Of course, other state rivalries that we see, especially associated with the religion, are between the Ottomans and Safavids, which I've already talked about to this point. And the last thing that we see, of course, which challenges state consolidation and expansion, is simply local resistance. Whether it's food riots, or in pretty much any empire that we see, or maybe samurai revolts in Japan, or just peasant uprisings in China or Europe. Showing a peasant uprising in Germany. Local resistance also challenged the ability of states to consolidate their power and then expand. Overcoming these examples of local resistance, overcoming rivalries, with other states, and overcoming competition over trade routes, of course, is paramount in establishing full, unparalleled control of their growing empires. All right, thank you for sticking with me as my voice goes here at the end of Key Concept 4.3. I hope that you found this information enlightening, and keep in mind that if you want any more information on any of this, take a look at some of those websites I gave you. Take a look at your review books. There's a lot packed in here to just a very short period of time. It's all fairly straightforward, but of course there are some things that we spend more time on than others in time period 4, and you may want to dive into those topics a little bit more on your own. Good luck, and we'll see you for time period 5.